This FedGov Today with Francis Rose program is sponsored by ACT-IAC. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, the future of the U.S. military in space and the future of the Space Force. The Vice Chief of Space Operations is here. The Defense Department takes another big step in using generative AI and hitting small business goals at HHS. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Space Force will celebrate its 4th anniversary this December. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy John Plumb says the Defense Department aims to, quote, normalize space as an operational domain. General D.T. Thompson, U.S. Space Force, is Vice Chief of Space Operations. General, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. First of all, this was going to be an exit interview when we first scheduled it a little while ago. It's not now. What's going on with that, and why is it not?
It's not. First, Francis, thanks so much for the invitation today. But I was approved to retire in October, and I've asked to extend that date. With the current hold on military nominations in the Senate right now, my replacement cannot be in place, and so I will serve until that hold breaks. It means that I will need to delay some promises I made to my wife and my children and now my grandchildren. It is what we agreed to when we volunteered to serve, and oftentimes, as is in this case, it's the families that sacrifice as a result of our service.
Without getting into the politics of it, what does the backfill result in inside the building, sir?
Well, like in many cases, there aren't backfills for key positions. The work of the Pentagon, the work of the Space Force, the work of the Department of Defense continues. In the case of the Space Force, we're very small and very lean. In other cases, folks have a sufficient number of senior leaders and generals to backfill with 3 stars and 2 stars. We don't really have that luxury in the Space Force, so I'll stick around to make sure that we continue to do what we need to inside the Pentagon.
Regarding the work of the Space Force, as I mentioned, you're almost on your 4th anniversary coming this December. What's your sense of the evolution of the force from December 2019 to today, sir?
Well, I would say that if you asked us 4 years ago where we thought we would be today, I'm not sure anybody would have believed we would have gone as far and as fast as we have. Certainly a reflection of the 14,000 plus Guardians out there, as well as our partners in other services working every day. Leaders in the White House and Congress and in the Pentagon have helped. We have done remarkable things. We've created an entirely new service. We've established, we created the blueprint. We've resourced the blueprint. We've firmly established the service. And now our new Chief of Space Operations, General Saltzman, said, now it's really time to focus on the business of delivering on the promises and the expectations of the American people.
What are the high points of that delivery, sir?
So I think the high points are a couple of things. First is we had to ensure that those things that we had been doing in other services and for decades in the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy, we continue to do without fail. Global Positioning System, GPS, that blue dot that people follow in their smartphone. You know, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, they all depend on it too. It had to continue functioning every day. We had to ensure they had communications every single day. The warning we provide from space, tracking objects in space, as we built this new service, all of those things that we did without fail before the creation of the Space Force, we had to continue. I think the fact that we did all that without a hiccup is a high point. And then the second is the things that we had to do to look at a new future, to build processes, to design a new future, and then convince the leadership of the nation we need to follow it are probably the 2 highest points I can think of.
What's your sense of the success so far of the integration into the joint force with elements of what the Space Force is doing now in the services previously? That I imagine there were some growing pains at least.
There were, and early on, and actually for several years before the creation of the Space Force, and in the early days, it wasn't easy to convince leaders in the Pentagon and other services and our civilian leadership of the rationale and the need for a Space Force. But as time went on, as we talked about the threats from space, the challenges in space, how important space capabilities are to the rest of the armed forces, what happened was we saw leaders and other services start advocating for the capabilities that we were supposed to provide. And as soon as the members of those other services talked about the need for communications and remote sensing and tracking and protecting those capabilities, we knew that that was a change. It was no longer us talking about it. It was the rest of the force. And that was the big change I think I saw in the last several years. Are
the threats from space the same as the threats that face the rest of the joint force and just different because they're in space, or are they different because they're in space, if you get the distinction?
Yes. No, actually, they are the same as the rest of the force, except they're in space, right? The fact that in a whole host of ways, potential adversaries can attack our space systems. They can attack them physically in space. They can attack them through cyberspace. They can attack them by jamming and other sorts of things. Those are the same sorts of techniques adversaries use to defeat airplanes and surface combatants in the Navy. So now all of those threats exist to space systems as well. So just like you have to protect aircraft effectively and protect carrier strike groups effectively, Army units have to protect themselves. We now have to protect space capabilities the same way.
You said recently, security remains probably one of our biggest challenges. We own the ability to change it. We just have some form of bureaucratic inertia that will not let us do so. How have you in the Space Force, as this new service, smaller and leaner as you described it, tried to get around or get through some of that bureaucratic inertia? People talk about it inside the Pentagon all the time.
They do, and we have made some progress. First of all, the internal design of the Space Force and the things that we control have helped. But our biggest challenges are with external organizations, but also mostly on the acquisition side, right? The purchasing of new systems. Our Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Frank Kendall, has been very adamant about finding ways to move as quickly. He hired an assistant secretary for space acquisition named Frank Calvelli. Frank is a very practical and pragmatic person. He has focused on delivering capabilities that are needed, but delivering them quickly. He has laid out some tenets and provided fabulous leadership. So I would tell you, inside of the Department of the Air Force, we're making remarkable progress. We have one organization that has cut the time to develop space systems in half. Normally takes us about 7 years to design and build a spacecraft. The Space Development Agency is doing it in 3.5 years, and they have a plan to put a new generation of satellites up every 2 years. They are moving out aggressively, so I think we're making progress.
What are they?
I don't want you to believe that the problem is solved. There's still plenty of bureaucratic inertia out there, but we're definitely making progress.
What are they doing? What are you doing inside the Space Force that other services could leverage? Because I imagine there are some of your peers across the services that are jealous when they hear that description.
Yeah, and frankly, we haven't really done much different that isn't available to others. It's just over time, especially in the era when we didn't have the challenge that is posed today by, for example, China. We didn't have to move as quickly and aggressively. There was a little tolerance for risk at the expense of delivering a product. In this case, we've been very ruthless and tailored the processes to only what's necessary, to focus on holding the requirements for the system fixed, to delivering on schedule, not to multiple reviews, multiple layers of bureaucracy where people can say no. And just by using the existing process, but focusing it on speed and delivery, is something that's available to others. And it's just a matter of a cultural change to take advantage.
Another thing that strikes me, it helps to get you to that, is the use of what you have called commercial space. General
Absolutely.
Raymond talked about it, the first chief of space operations. You mentioned General Saltzman. He's discussed it also. What kind of impact is commercial space having, and how are you using that concept of that industrial base to support the Space Force?
Yeah, and I would say first, the fact that we have such a vibrant commercial space sector is a matter of security for the nation in the economic sense. And of course, the American mind is so creative and so ingenious. They're out there thinking about space in new and different ways. And so, for example, in areas where we don't have to build our own systems, they provide communication services. They can provide remote sensing services. In many cases, they have sensors that can help us track objects in space. Where those commercial services exist and we can simply buy and use them for our capabilities, we absolutely do. In addition to that, even if we can't use our services directly, they're developing some new technologies, they're developing new ways of operating and doing business, and where those make sense, we're also adopting them for our purposes. And then finally, that those market forces that drive to more rapid and lower cost manufacturing, quick delivery that is responding to market pressures. That helps us in the design, manufacture, and fielding of our space systems.
You have about 30 seconds left, General. Normally, my last question at an exit interview is, what didn't you achieve that you wanted to while you were in? Since this isn't an exit interview anymore, what will you do to run through the tape, the term that I hear people use all the time? What are you going to focus on in the time that you have left?
Yeah, so there are a few things that are not quite finished in that sense. We've got a few more pieces of the organization to put in place, a couple of key missions that aren't exactly where they need to be. And so I'm going to work on those last bits of the organizational design and efficiency, as well as one or two of my special projects that I think will help the Space Force make sure that they're in good hands before I move on.
General Thompson, thanks very much for joining me today. It's great to have you on the program. You can read more about the future of the Space Force at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the Defense Department takes another big step in using generative AI. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. Task Force Lima is the next step in the Defense Department's use of generative artificial intelligence. The department says the task force will assess, synchronize, and employ generative AI capabilities across the department from inside the Chief Data and AI Office. Dave Wennergren's Chief Executive Officer of ACT-IAC. He's former Deputy CIO of the Defense Department and former Navy Department CIO. Dave, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. What do you think this task force will look at regarding AI inside the department?
Well, DoD has been a leader in AI across the federal government so far, and they've aligned it under their Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Officer, so they put it in the right place. I mean, we need to understand these technologies. You think about the power of large language models to capture vast amounts of data and then apply learning algorithms. Frankly, it's going to change everything about the way the department does business, from the warfighting domain to the business mission area. But if we need to understand how to use these technologies effective, we absolutely have to understand how our adversaries are going to use these technologies, because they will be using them against us.
The Defense Department says leveraging partnerships across the department, the intelligence community, and other government agencies, and then it describes what the task force will do. What should other government agencies do to get on board with this? Because if the Defense Department is at the cutting edge of this, it strikes me that civilian agencies and other orgs would want to be on board.
Well, partnerships, music to my ears, because of course that's what we do at ACT-IAC, is bring people together in partnerships. And it's just so important because, again, this is going to impact the way we do business across the entire government. It's a subject that ACT-IAC's emerging technology community of interest has cared about for a while now. And so I would encourage all our federal agencies, DoD and civilian agencies, to go check out the website, because we have a number of reports about how to understand AI and how to make sure that we're implementing AI ethically.
How does one measure success in a task force inside the Department of Defense? I know you have some experience with that.
Well, it is an amazingly big place. And so one of the things that you have to be careful about is you can't do everything at once. Task forces that have succeeded in the past, and I can think of a few, they take a few things where they can demonstrate success, because it's easy for us to become disillusioned when the whole big enterprise doesn't change at once. So find some quick wins where you can sort of communicate where you've made an improvement in a business mission area or an intelligence mission area by using generative AI capabilities, and that'll win the hearts of the rest.
Whatever the deliverable of this task force is, what are the steps to success to get somebody to do something with it instead of just admire it on a shelf for a period of time until it gets chucked?
Well, number one, the bosses have to tell you to do it. So it's great that the Deputy Secretary of Defense herself is leading the charge to do this. And then number two, you got to relentlessly communicate, and you got to communicate in a way that talks about outcomes and things that have changed, because otherwise it's really easy for people to stick in their comfort zone. But this is a place where you just can't. I mean, your kids are using ChatGPT. You better figure out how to use it to do business better at your job. Well,
and more importantly than the fact that our kids are using it, our potential adversaries are using it too, in the same levels at which I imagine this task force will examine DoD use.
Yep. we'll get left behind.
That's right. One of my favorite things every year is the Executive Leadership Conference, Imagination ELC, that your organization puts on in Hershey, coming at the end of October. I have more details on it later in the show. What is the theme of it this year, Dave?
The business of doing. And I think our focus area will have a lot for everyone to be a part of if you want to come and be a part of the show, as it were. October 29th to October 31st, all the issues of the President's management agenda. We'll be talking about future tech, emerging tech, tech modernization, cybersecurity, the future of the workforce, acquisition, climate change. So there'll just be a number of ways to engage with your peers in government and industry. And you get to see Francis Rose live and in person.
Oh, well, I don't know how exciting that can possibly be, but one of the things that I think is really cool about what you just described is that for a long time, I think there was a perception, at least, that ELC was a conference about technology. And you led with the President's management agenda. You talked about acquisition and a number of the other issues that are certainly part and parcel of IT in the government space, but also that surround it, that sit around it. Why is that so important in your view?
So ACT-IAC's roots are in the technology space almost 45 years ago, but technology is frankly embedded anywhere. So this is a CXO event. I mean, how we do acquisition, how we do human resources management, how we do the mission areas of our agencies, all those things have technology embedded in them, from AI to cybersecurity. And so there's just no shortage of topics that will appeal to you wherever you work in government.
So same question about the ELC as about the task force. What's success mean after the event?
Success is that 1,000 people have gathered and learned and grown together so that they can pick up the brush and help paint an even better future for the government.
Dave Wennergren, great to talk to you as always, my
Thanks
friend.
for having
Thanks
me.
very much. You can read more about the Pentagon's AI task force at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, hitting small business goals at HHS. The leader of HHS's OSDBU office, Shannon Jackson's here when FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. The Department of Health and Human Services small business contracting goal for fiscal 2023 is 22%. The agency has goals for subcategories of small businesses this fiscal year, too. Shannon Jackson's Executive Director of the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization at HHS. Shannon, welcome. Thanks for coming. Beyond the 22% that I mentioned, what are some of the other goals that you want to hit this year, and what's your progress toward making them all?
Well, Francis, I will tell you first, thank you for inviting me today. It is truly an honor to be here. Every year we get gold by the Small Business Administration. This year, our fiscal year goal was a 22%, as you mentioned. I am pleased to say today, we're currently right now at 23.13%. Above the assigned goal for the department. Also, when we think about the goals, we're the small disadvantaged business goal, which, as you know, has transitioned from 5% to 12%. And this year's goal for HHS was 13.04. Again, I'm proud to say that we're currently at 13.04%. And we are continuing to push towards our next fiscal year, closing out this fiscal year. The other two goals that I'm really excited about were HubZone and Service Disabled Veteran Owned have been two targets that the department has not historically made. And right now, currently, we are at 2.34% against a 3% goal. And for the HubZone, for Service Disabled, we're at 2.23%. So those are the two targets that we really wanted to improve on, as well as the SDB goal for this fiscal year.
What are some of the things that you're doing to meet those goals? The challenge being, if you hit them, they'll probably get raised on you next year. How are you going to perpetuate that momentum?
I will tell you, for instance, one of the things that we went into this fiscal year was three things called GPS, growth, predictability and synchronization. When I think about growth, I think about growing our industrial base. We have over 13 optives that operate within inside of HHS. And growing that industrial base to meet a very diverse portfolio is critical. So we have really engaged some of our strategic partners, i.e. our large primes, our industrial base, and our associations have been really critical in that growth. Predictability, when I talk about that predictability, the accuracy of our forecast for the department. One of the things I think this administration has really done for the department and the federal government was really mandating updated forecasts for small business opportunities for each of the federal agencies. I was happy this year because this year we had over 5,000 some odd opportunities in there in that forecast. So giving the small business industrial base more predictability and know what to go after each throughout the fiscal year. The last piece is that's synchronization. That is that partnership with our internal organizations, again, those optives, as well as our industrial base, our large primes, and our associations. So that was the real key for FY23 and as we move into 24.
What did you bring, do you think, from your work in the Defense Department in this area to HHS? They're not similar organizations exactly. I imagine there are some parallels, but that experience, I imagine, informed you well.
For instance, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I've always said when I worked in the Department of Defense, it was really about taking care of the warfighter. As I transitioned to the Department of Health and Human Services, it became about taking care of the American people, which encompasses the warfighter. Now, when I think about the diverse portfolio or the acquisition portfolio of HHS, it does everything. You know, whether CDC, NIH, CMS, it is across the acquisition. So it's similar in scope, but there are some differences. But again, I think bringing a strong industrial base is critical and helping us grow that.
What do you want to do to continue the momentum that you described? I imagine, like I said, I wasn't kidding. I imagine your goals, because you're meeting them, will get bigger next year, and you'll be called on to continue to grow and grow and grow.
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the things that I think that will be critical is a culture shift. I've been there in HHS for about 1.5 years now, and it has been a culture shift. Because we have to really show that small businesses can perform the tasks that we are asking them to do, and they continue to do it. And really continue, I think one of the things that as I move forward is that continual education to our department. Because I think that has been a game changer, because to show where small businesses have made an impact on the industrial base and on the American people. So again, I think the biggest thing, if I come back to the question, is education, training our workforce, and then continue to really ensure small businesses are there to meet the mission of the department.
What makes a good small business partner with an agency like HHS, Shannon?
Procurement ready.
Yeah.
I think understanding what we do, understanding how their business aligns with what we do. And then I think the biggest thing is being flexible. You know, being a small business is difficult. You know, if being a small business was easy, everybody would be. But, you know, when you look at a portfolio of HHS, you know, given we're the second largest federal spend for small business, you have to have a diverse portfolio. And then being able to meet the challenges of the department. And that's where it's critical for our small business industrial base to do their homework, be a part of the events that we host, to understand where we're going as a department, because it's ever changing. So
I want to pull back from that idea of hitting particular numbers, making goals, and look more broadly at something that you've mentioned a couple of times in this conversation already, and that's building this diverse small business base that serves the department, and I imagine by default other federal agencies too. What are the things that your office can do and does do to nurture that base on maybe even a more philosophical level than a do this, that, and this third thing?
Well, I think really the biggest thing that we have done this year is our partnerships. And that was that synchronization that we talked about. I need large primes to help me grow that industrial base. But I also needed my small business industrial base to meet the challenges that are currently facing that they align with. And I think the biggest thing is that engagement. We have engaged our associations. That has been critical. It's too many to name. But again, one of the things that I strive to do when I got here was build that external partnership, which has been critical for our success and what we are going to continue in FY24 and beyond.
And again, thinking about FY24 and beyond, and not just from a goals perspective, what is kind of your strategic vision for how to make the department easier for these companies to do business with, but also to grow that base in the way that you would like to?
I think the biggest thing about that would be is really creating a good forecast. In order to reduce the barriers, you got to have good requirements from the department, and then having that small business industrial base know where those requirements are at, and then actually go after them. And that's going to be critical to really reduce the barriers, create more small businesses inside of our industrial base.
We've spoken about this a number of times over the years, Shannon. On a personal level, why is working with small business so important to you? And you've said before, very rewarding to you. Why is it something that really matters to you so much?
Wow. I have been working with small business for a long time. And what I have realized is small businesses are a game changer. Whether on my DoD side or whether you look at some of the things in the health and human services, they have been a part of some of the major challenges across the federal government. But nobody knows who they are. And it's our responsibility as leaders, as the OSTBU leaders, to really help promote that. Because again, I strongly believe that they make an impact. When you talk about creating over 46%, 0.4% job creation, they're on the cutting edge of innovation. They make a huge impact to our industrial base. And it's our responsibility as OSTBU directors and the federal government to really help continue to bring them forward.
It's great to see you again, Shannon. Thanks very much for your time.
Francis. Appreciate it.
You can read more about small business contracting at HHS at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today with Francis Rose is back in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, Dave Wennergren told you the theme of the Executive Leadership Conference this year is the business of doing. ELC's coming October 29th through 31st in Hershey, Pennsylvania. You can read more about the conference, check out the agenda, and register at ACT-IAC.org. FedGov Today returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. The Chief Information Officers at the Commerce Department and Customs and Border Protection, Andre Mendez and Sunny Bagwalia, will be here. Hope you will be too. I'm Francis Rose. Have a great week. See you next Sunday. Thanks for watching.